Fairly well, maybe not that well. Emily, Tisch Sussman, you've got deep roots in the New York political scene. Hypothetically, let's say Michael Bloomberg were to get in this race. Let's say Michael Bloomberg were to surprise a lot of folks and win the actual nomination. You have then a battle of the billionaires. What would that look like?
Like a lot of money spent. That certainly would look like. I mean, that's his pathway to being a serious contender at this point. And it's not a crazy pathway. It's actually the Tom Steyer path. Look, Andrew Yang makes a good point that Bloomberg hasn't been in the state, hasn't been in any of the early states, and I'm actually not sure how high his name ID is at this point. I'm not sure that voters really know who he is. All of the testing that we have is months and months to this point, years old. So he does have to introduce himself, but you can do that with money. You can do that with ads on TV. You can do that with digital. So yes, they care about having the in-person conversations with him, but there are a lot of people that are looking at the field that said, look, we started with a huge field and we're still not totally decided. So if someone comes in that looks a little bit different, and I think where Democrats are starting this year, which is different than any other cycle, is they're starting with who can win as opposed to who do they personally identify with. And if they think that because he has a business background and governed a city, that he has a good chance against Trump, Democrats may be open to hearing that message.
Tara, you wrote an op-ed back in March, if I'm not mistaken. We'll put it on the screen for our viewers, and I'm going to read part of it for our listeners on Sirius Satellite Radio. Bloomberg wrote an op-ed, and in that op-ed, he said, in part, some have told me that to win the Democratic nomination, I would need to change my views to match the polls. But I've been hearing that my whole political career. I believe I would defeat Donald Trump in a general election, but I am clear-eyed about the difficulty of winning the Democratic nomination in such a crowded field. Again, that was Mayor Bloomberg's op-ed back in March. It would seem as if the angst that some Democratic voters have said that they feel about the current crop of candidates, Michael Bloomberg also feels that angst. Does Michael Bloomberg have a legitimate shot at becoming the Democratic nominee?
I don't think so. And I know the conventional wisdom, and everyone who's been talking lately has been saying, oh, this is going to be a huge shakeup to the race. Yes, Michael Bloomberg has money, and you can buy a lot of things with money. But that is one of the major points of contention amongst the majority of Democratic voters, is that Democratic voters, by and large, feel the party has become too corporate. Now, there are degrees around that sentiment, like there's the degrees that go as far as Elizabeth Warren, but by and large, that is a massive concern. Kirsten Gillibrand, when she was running, who is, considered pretty much a moderate Democrat, one of her big talking points on the stump was around the fact that the party had become too corporate. So I think that Michael Bloomberg, yes, he is has some really strong positions on gun safety, on climate that resonate with Democratic voters. But he also has some significant liabilities, stop and frisk. That is not very popular with black voters. I might be actually understating that at this point. And so he's going to go into a primary where black voters overrepresent in many of the states that he has to compete in. He also has a liability, and I think retail politics at the end of the day, one of the best ways that continues to earn a vote is by looking someone in the eye, shaking their hand, and asking for their vote. Digital is great. Digital helps. It works. It's important. But he has to build an organization where other people have been doing the work all along. And also, the other thing that people are I think, underselling is the polling says that actually most Democratic voters are happy with the field of candidates. There is some angst around the edges, but I would argue a lot of that angst is coming from a segment of the donor class, because I think the donor class is portrayed as simply being just people who are moderate Democrats who don't want their taxes to go up. There are actually a lot of pretty liberal donors, too, within the Democratic Party that give big money. But there is a segment that's uncomfortable with the Elizabeth Warrens of the world. They're uncomfortable with Bernie Sanders. And so, yes, those people are probably the people that were calling Bloomberg to get into the race.
Perhaps Bill Gates, who we heard from a couple of days ago.
Unfortunately, that's not the rank and file of the Democratic Party.
What's relatable? I mean, when Michael Bloomberg, a guy's worth about roughly $50 billion, according to Forbes. That may be a conservative estimate. On what level is a Michael Bloomberg relatable?
I think it's obvious. It's competence. I think people in this country want a competent president who can actually get things done for the American people, bring people together. Michael Bloomberg served first as a Republican, then as an independent. As mayor of this city, he brought the city together. He got the city moving forward, particularly after 9/11. And I think people trust that. I think people are very concerned that on the one hand, you have Elizabeth Warren, who wants to potentially bankrupt the country. Some people are concerned about with the Medicare for All plan. And then you've got another poll in being Joe Biden occupying the centrist lane. And I think a lot of people are concerned that Joe Biden just does not have the wherewithal at this point in his career to be the nominee, let alone beat Trump.
Have you conducted any polling on Mayor Bloomberg's behalf just to test the waters presidentially?
I have not personally.
Are you aware of any polling? Do you know if they've done any internal polling?
I'm sure they've done a lot of polling because Michael Bloomberg is a smart guy. He's very data-driven, and I don't think he'd be taking the step if he didn't realize that there was a lane for him.
There's no way they're going into this without polling. They definitely have polling. I'd also note that this is actually a pretty good week if he's thinking about jumping in, because there was very talented campaign staff on Beto O'Rourke's staff, on Castro's staff, on Harris's staff that have all been let go in the last 10 days. They all had really good people. So whereas a couple of weeks ago there would have been not that many great campaign people to choose from, there actually are now.